So we've had the baseline M2 Mac Mini in the studio for a couple days now, and what I want to do in this video is compare the M2 Mac Mini toe-to-toe with the M2 MacBook Air, because under the hood, they're pretty much the same exact thing, minus a couple things which we'll talk about, but the price difference is substantial, so it doesn't make sense to maybe get a Mac Mini over the MacBook Air. Let's find out in this video, and we're going to go through a bunch of testing, see exactly what it's like, and see exactly what that price difference gets you going from the M2 Mac Mini to the M2 MacBook Air, and then also talking about how much more portable the MacBook Air is than the actual Mac Mini, because you might be surprised, the Mac Mini is actually pretty portable for what it is. But without further ado, let's talk about the M2 Mac Mini versus the M2 MacBook Air. Let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is price. A lot of you guys came at me in the comments for the last video that I mentioned the Mac Mini being $499 from the student store or from the education store. So we're going to go to retail pricing, but just so you are aware, if you are a student or an educator, you do get $100 off both the M2 MacBook Air and the M2 Mac Mini. So it is $499 and then $1099 respectively for those two devices through the education store. But for everybody else, the retail price is $599 for the M2 Mac Mini and then also $1199 for the M2 MacBook Air. So it is a $600 difference. So you are paying twice as much to go with the M2 MacBook Air versus the M2 Mac Mini, going from $600 to $1,200. Now let's quickly get into the specs and talk about what you're getting internally for that price point. So internally you get the same exact thing minus one difference. They both come with the M2 chip, they both come with 256 gigs of storage, they both come with 8 gigs of RAM. The only difference is that the M2 MacBook Air has an 8-core CPU and an 8-core GPU at that baseline model versus the Mac Mini actually has the same 8-core CPU, but you do get a 10-core GPU standard. If you want to get the 10-core GPU on the MacBook Air, then you have to step up to the $1499 version that has also 512 gigs of internal storage, but still the same 8 gigs of RAM. A couple more things to mention with the M2 Mac Mini that you get internally over the M2 MacBook Air is that you do get Bluetooth 5.3 on the M2 Mac Mini versus Bluetooth 5.0 on the M2 MacBook Air, and you also get Wi-Fi 6E, which is a new protocol to get you faster Wi-Fi speeds, both down and upload, but you do need to have a Wi-Fi 6E enabled router in order to take full advantage of this. But if you do have one, just know that the MacBook Air has Wi-Fi 6 and the M2 Mac Mini has Wi-Fi 6E standard. So far, internally, you are getting a little bit more if you just go with the baseline model. You get a little bit more GPU power, you get the new Bluetooth, you get the new Wi-Fi, so some things to continue to consider. And now let's talk about the port situation for both of these devices. With the M2 MacBook Air, it's very self-explanatory, right? You get the new MagSafe capable charging, so a little MagSafe little slot, I guess you would call it. You get two Thunderbolt ports on the same side of that MagSafe, and then on the other side you get a headphone jack, and that is it when it comes to the port situation. But then if you come over to the Mac Mini, you get an array of ports with the baseline model. So with the baseline model, you get two USB-A ports, you get an HDMI, you get a headphone jack, you get two Thunderbolt 4 ports, you get a 1 gigabit Ethernet port, which is upgradable to 10 gigabit Ethernet for I believe $100 if you are lucky enough to have 10 gig wired Ethernet cable. Then you also get the power input, and then you get the power button as well. And I know we're mostly talking about the baseline models here, but if you do get the M2 Pro version of the Mac Mini, you get 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, so that's something to consider if you are thinking about getting the M2 Pro versus the M2 MacBook Air. And then the last thing I want to mention in terms of what these two devices support is external monitor support. So with the M2 Mac Mini, you actually get to support up to 2 different monitors at the same time, versus with the M2 MacBook Air, you can only support one of them. Why that's the case, I really don't know, but then also with the M2 Pro, you can support up to 3 different devices on the Mac Mini. And when it comes to what they can actually support up to, with both of them, they can support up to 6K 60Hz on both the M2 MacBook Air and the M2 Mac Mini. And then you can also support with the M2 Mac Mini another 5K monitor at 60Hz, and then finally you can support 2 4K monitors at 60Hz as well. So those are all things to consider when you're thinking about maybe doing a battle station or a desktop solution. Obviously the Mac Mini is more set up for the desktop solution, but the MacBook Air has its own thing, which is a lot of portability. So now that we know the specs of each one, you can see that for $600 with the Mac Mini or $500 through the education store, in my opinion, it is the best bang for buck for horsepower on any computer on the market, period. Like, talk to me about a $500 or $600 computer on the Windows side. Like, what does that get you? And how fast is that going to work? Will you be happy with the experience? It's probably not going to get you where you want to be, versus with the Mac Mini, it will get you where you want to be. But now let's talk about what the difference of gap is. Like, what do you get for the additional $600 with the M2 MacBook Air? So firstly, obviously it's a laptop, right? So you get a built-in keyboard, the built-in trackpad, and you get that display, that 13.6-inch display with that beautiful notch. And in that notch, you do get a 1080p webcam, which in its own right is fine. You know, it gets the job done if you're doing Google Meets meetings or you're doing a Zoom meeting. If you're just doing work stuff, if you're like a live streamer and you need to actually have some quality footage, probably not the best thing to do. But if you're just a corporate worker that needs to get on sales calls, get on Zoom meetings and things like that, it's more than enough for a webcam. And then obviously on the Mac Mini side, you get none of that because you only get the Mac Mini. And with the M2 MacBook Air, you do get a 13.6 LED panel that is 2560 by 1660. I think it's 1664 exactly, which gives you a 225 ppi, which for my opinion is more than enough for a lot of users, especially MacBook Air users that aren't really pixel peeping too much. And you do get 500 nits of brightness, you get the P3 color gamut, so it's a beautiful display in my opinion. And if you were to try to find a display that gives you the exact same specs, you know, you're looking at $300, $400, maybe even $500 at that point. Then you have the keyboard, like I mentioned, which is a great keyboard now that they got rid of the butterfly keyboard. We went back to the chiclet style. And then the trackpad is in a class of its own. Again, the trackpad directly from Apple is, I believe, $150 if you get just a trackpad alone. You know, the trackpad is top of class when it comes to laptops and navigation and being able to use your trackpad as a gesture-based control system for your MacBook Air. And then obviously because it is a laptop, the MacBook Air is, you do get the ability to run around with it without needing to be persistently connected to power and connected to the wall. With the Mac Mini, there's no internal battery. You cannot just pick it up and plug it into a monitor that's not connected to the wall because it just won't give you power and it won't turn on. Versus the MacBook Air is an absolute battery champ. I'm getting anywhere from 12 to 15, sometimes 18 hours of continuous playback time of getting work done. Obviously, I'm not video editing on that machine. I'm doing a lot of WordPress stuff. I'm on Google Docs. You know, I'm watching a YouTube video. I'm in Slack. I'm sending emails. Like a lot of like lower level task stuff where it's not really pushing the machine too much, but I have a lot of stuff open at the same time. I'm talking 30, 40 Chrome tabs open with 10 Safari tabs open, a YouTube video playing. Like I said, Slack is open, so I have third-party apps running at the same time. So it handles a lot and it handles it well from a battery consumption standpoint. And then the last thing that I do want to compare between these two from a hardware standpoint is the speaker system. So the M2 Mac Mini does come with speakers, but I will say they are extremely tinny. They're not going to win any awards. I'm going to play a little bit of music on both of them because you do have the 4-speaker system, the quad speaker system on the M2 MacBook Air, which for the size and for how light it is and for the thickness of it, or the thinness of it for lack of a better term, is pretty outstanding. It's very similar to the experience you get with the iPad Pro. iPad Pro, in my opinion, is still better, but for this laptop, in this form factor, in this class of laptop, the speakers on the M2 MacBook Air are also top of class, versus the Mac Mini is a little bit tinny, doesn't give you too much bass, so I'll let you guys decide right now with a little bit of B-roll. I told you, the Mac Mini speakers, they're there and they'll get the job done if you just need to have some audio playback, but they are extremely tinny and it's not going to win any awards. Now let's talk about the last thing that the M2 MacBook Air has over the Mac Mini, and it's just overall portability, of course, right? It's a laptop, it's very thin, it's extremely light, fits in any backpack, it fits in most bags, and it does give you the ability to move around a lot, right? So let's say you have a desk setup at home like I do right behind me, and I plug in the MacBook Air right in with a USB-C cable, I'm charging the device, and I'm now using a desktop solution for whatever I need to get done. And let's say you have an office desk setup and you want to move from place to place, you can do that. And then finally, let's say you just want to get some work done at a coffee shop, or you want to get some work done at a WeWork, or something where it's a little bit more mobile and you don't have a dedicated desk setup. That's where this wins. Because if you really think about it, with the Mac Mini, those first two situations, they work pretty well. Like the Mac Mini is a portable desktop. It's very light, it's small, it's compact, and you only need the power cable to come with you if you are moving around. So for instance, if I like to have my desk setup at home with the Mac Mini, and then let's say I need to go to an office where I have a secondary setup over there, I'll just bring the Mac Mini with the power cable, go to that office desk setup, plug it into power, plug in the USB-C cable, and then everything populates, and it's the same type of experience that you would get with the M2 MacBook Air. The only time the M2 MacBook Air does win is when you are in those other situations where you're moving a lot, you're at a coffee shop like I mentioned, you're at a WeWork, you're at a friend's house, you know, you just need your laptop on your lap, you're on the couch for instance. That's where this wins in portability. But like I said, if you just go from desk to desk, the Mac Mini can get that done because all you need is the USB-C cable directly plugged in to the actual monitor and you're good to go. And now the last thing I want to mention is the actual experience of using both of these devices. In my opinion, they are the exact same from the baseline standpoint. You know, the 8 gigs and 256 gigs of storage on both sides, it gives you the same experience. Apps open very snappily, especially Apple first-party applications, but even third-party applications that were revamped to work with the M chip work extremely well on both of these devices. So there's no real issue with anything that you want to get done. Everything I mentioned in my initial review, right? You can do some light gaming, some light video editing. It'll work with all of your medial tasks, like I mentioned, like Slack, emailing, Netflix, YouTube, having multiple applications open, having multiple, tabs open in your Chrome, in your Safari. The M2 Mac Mini and the M2 MacBook Air will be able to handle all of those tasks with little to no sweat, especially with the Mac Mini, because the Mac Mini does have a fan in there, and I haven't really heard it turn on. It's only when I pull the Mac Mini out and I kind of feel the air being pushed out very, very slightly. So if you are doing something that's a little bit more intense, you might get a little bit more power and a little bit more oomph and maybe a little bit more leeway with the Mac Mini, because it does have a built-in fan and an exhaust to get that hot air out of there. But at the same time, the Mac Mini has not gotten hot whatsoever. Even when I was exporting a 4K video, it still did not get warm. I'm not doing anything too crazy on the gaming side. I'm not going to enter any esports tournaments or any tournaments at all with this thing, but if you are a casual gamer that wants to play a little NBA 2K, a little CSGO, something that's easy to play on the Mac Mini, it works great, and you can connect your Xbox controller and your PS4 controller right to the Mac Mini with no issues whatsoever. So at the end of the day, the question that you got to ask yourself is, how portable do you want to be? Do you want to be able to grab your laptop and put it on your lap, at 7, 8 o'clock at night while watching something on the TV and you're on the couch? Do you want to be able to do that? Because obviously with the M2 Mac Mini, that is not going to happen. But if you are somebody that just goes from desk to desk and you have your desk solutions all figured out and you just have the one cable solution, maybe the Mac Mini is for you, because for the price, it's so hard to beat. $600 for the price to performance ratio that you get with the Mac Mini is unfathomable. Like, I like to compare the Mac Mini now to like the Corvette of the PC world. The Corvette has always been known to be the best bang for buck in terms of horsepower. For the price, comparing it to things like a Lamborghini, like a McLaren, like you get a lot of horsepower and a lot of torque out of that Corvette for a much smaller price than those supercars. Same thing with this Mac Mini. It might not have all the bells and whistles like the display, like the keyboard, like the trackpad, like the webcam, but it does have the actual horsepower needed to run everything that nicer device, quote unquote, can do. So at the end of the day, it's all about portability preference. Do you want to go to a coffee shop and work? Do you want to go to a friend's house and work? Do you want to go to an office that doesn't have a desk set up and work and still be able to get your job and your work done? Then yeah, you're going to need a laptop, and the M2 MacBook Air will be enough for you to get all that stuff done. But if you're somebody that just goes from maybe your home office to your office and you just need to bring a Mac Mini with you, like that is a great solution as well, especially at the price. Again, it's $600 compared to $1,200 on the M2 MacBook Air. And in all honesty, you can probably get 2 keyboards, 2 mice, and 2 budget level monitors to have a home office and an office and just go between those, and that'll still be under that $600 price difference. So that's one thing to consider. Maybe you can have 2 desk setups for the price of one, versus with the MacBook Air, you spend $1,200, and then you still want to go out and buy a case for the MacBook Air and a backpack for the MacBook Air and maybe a screen protector, and maybe you still want to have a desk setup that you're gonna have to build with a 4K monitor. So it does get expensive if you want to have the desk setup, but also be portable enough to use your laptop whenever you want. Versus the Mac Mini, it's a lot less price prohibitive and really opens the door to a lot of possibilities. So leave some comments down below. What do you guys think? Is the Mac Mini enough for you, for your use case, or is the portability factor of the M2 MacBook Air worth that $600 price point, or that $600 price difference going from the M2 Mac Mini to the M2 MacBook Air? Because again, under the hood and from an experience standpoint, once you're plugged into a monitor and you have all your peripherals, it's the same exact thing, everybody. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys did enjoy, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know you made it to the end. And like I said, let me know down below, what would you guys prefer? The portability of the M2 MacBook Air, or the pure horsepower and the price to performance ratio of the M2 Mac Mini? Because again, that's pretty much what you're looking at. Do I want to be portable, or do I want to save money and I'll be okay moving from desktop to desktop solution, whether it's at a home office or at a regular office or anything in between? But that's going to do it, everybody. If you want to watch some more iPadOS, iOS, or macOS videos, click on one of these right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando, and I'm out of here, everybody. Peace. I prefer the portability of the M2 MacBook Air, but if somebody were to tell me the M2 Mac Mini, like, I would not complain, or I would not try to convince you otherwise, because that thing is amazing, especially for the price.